Richard was a very rich man. He owned many businesses and had money more than most people could imagine. He lived in a big house with a large garden, a swimming pool, and many rooms. Even though Richard had everything he could want, there was one thing that mattered most to him: his only daughter, Emily. Emily was a bright and kind girl. Richard loved her very much and always wanted the best for her. For the past few months, Richard had been traveling a lot. His business needed him in many places around the world. Every day he worked hard, made deals, and talked to important people. But even with all his success, Richard missed Emily. He missed her smile, her laughter, and the time they spent together at home. He knew that Emily was growing up fast, and he wanted to be there for her as much as possible. Finally, after a long trip, Richard's plane landed at the airport near his city. He felt tired from the journey, but excited. The thought of seeing Emily again made his heart happy. He called his driver and went straight home. The driver took him through the busy streets until they reached Richard's big house. The sun was setting, and the sky looked soft and orange. Richard stepped out of the car and looked around. The garden was full of flowers, and the sound of birds filled the air. The house looked just as he remembered, clean and shining under the evening light. Richard smiled. Soon he would see Emily. He was sure she was waiting for him as he walked. Inside the house, Richard's eyes searched for Emily. He heard quiet sounds coming from the backyard. Curious, he moved towards the back door. When he opened it, he stopped suddenly. What he saw surprised him. In the swimming pool, Emily was playing and laughing, but she was not alone. Next to her was Grace, the family's maid. Grace was a kind woman who had worked for Richard's family for many years. She was always quiet, careful, and respectful.
Oh, Richard knew Grace well.
She had taken care of the house and helped Emily when Richard was away. But seeing Emily and Grace together in the pool like this was new. They were both smiling and splashing water at each other, having fun like close friends. Emily was wearing her swimsuit, and Grace was also in the water, enjoying the moment. Their laughter was bright and full of joy. Richard felt a mix of emotions. At first he was shocked. This was not what he expected to see. He'd always thought of Grace as a helper, not someone who would play and have fun in the pool with his daughter. He wondered why Emily was spending time like this with Grace. He felt unsure. He looked closer and noticed that Emily's eyes were full of happiness. Grace's face showed warmth and care. It was clear they enjoyed each other's company. Richard stood there quietly watching them. He did not want to interrupt the moment, but also felt a little strange. After a few minutes, Emily saw Richard and waved happily. "Daddy, you're home?" she called out. Her voice was sweet and full of love. She swam toward him with a big smile. Grace smiled too, but stayed a little behind, waiting respectfully. Richard walked to the edge of the pool and looked at his daughter. He smiled back, feeling his heart soften. "Hello, Emily," he said. "I missed you so much." Emily climbed out of the pool and gave him a big hug. "I missed you too, Daddy. Look, Grace and I were having fun." Richard nodded and looked at Grace again. Grace smiled politely and said, "Welcome home, sir. Emily wanted to surprise you." Richard felt his worry begin to fade. He knew Emily loved Grace, but this closeness was new to him. He was not sure how to feel about it. Was it good or strange? Richard had always kept distance between the family and the maid. Now he saw that Emily and Grace had a different kind of bond. That evening, Richard sat down with Emily and Grace in the living room. He asked Emily about her time with Grace. Emily spoke happily about how Grace helped her with school, listened to her problems, and even told her stories. She said Grace was like a second mother to her when Richard was away. Emily explained how lonely she felt sometimes, but Grace's kindness made her feel safe and loved. Richard listened carefully. He began to understand something important. Grace was not just an employee. She was part of Emily's life in a very special way. He felt proud that his daughter had someone like Grace by her side, but also confused about how to change his own views. As the night went on, Richard started thinking about his family and the meaning of love. He realized that sometimes the people we do not expect become the most important in our lives. He knew he had to learn to see Grace differently. He wanted to be a better father and a better man. Before going to bed, Richard looked at Emily and Grace again. He smiled and said, "Thank you both for being here. I'm happy to be home with you." Emily hugged him tightly. Grace nodded with a gentle smile. It was the start of a new chapter for their family, one filled with love, respect, and understanding. After that surprising evening, Richard stayed at home for a few days. He wanted to spend more time with Emily and also to understand the bond she had with Grace. Each day, he noticed little things that showed how close Emily and Grace really were. It was a side of his family life that he had never seen before. One morning, Richard woke up early and went to the kitchen. He found Grace preparing breakfast and Emily helping her set the table. They smiled warmly when they saw him.
"Oh, good."
"Morning, sir," Grace said politely. "Emily is making your favorite pancakes today." Richard felt touched. It was a simple moment, but it showed care and love. Sat down and watched them work together like a small team. Emily laughed softly when Grace told her a funny story about her own childhood. The way they talked made Richard realize how much Grace was part of Emily's life. After breakfast, Richard went to his study to check some work emails. But Emily came to visit him. She was full of energy and wanted to tell him about her school day. She spoke about her friends, her lessons, and her dreams. But then Emily talked about Grace again. She said, "Daddy, Grace helps me a lot. Listens to me when I feel sad. She helps me with my homework and even gives me advice." Richard nodded, but felt a little surprised. He had never thought that Grace would play such a big role in Emily's life. He thought of Grace only as someone who cleaned the house and cooked food. But Emily's words showed something much deeper. That afternoon, Richard decided to spend time in the garden. He sat by the pool, watching Emily and Grace again. They were playing a game of catch with a small ball. Grace threw the ball gently, and Emily caught it, laughing. The sun was warm, and the air smelled of flowers. Richard felt a strange feeling inside. It was a mix of happiness and confusion. He was happy because his daughter was joyful, but he was confused because he had never allowed himself to see Grace as more than a maid. Now, he saw the care and love between them clearly. Over the next few days, Richard observed more moments like this. He saw Grace helping Emily get ready for school, tying her hair and reminding her to pack her bag. He saw Emily sharing her secrets with Grace and trusting her completely. Grace would listen patiently, offering gentle advice. Their relationship was close and real. One evening, Richard sat with Grace alone in the living room. He wanted to talk to her honestly. "Grace," he said quietly, "I see how much you care for Emily. She speaks very highly of you." Grace smiled softly. "Thank you, sir. Emily is like my own daughter. I have cared for her since she was very young. When you are away, I try to be there for her as much as I can." Richard felt a warmth in his heart. He had always respected Grace as an employee, but now he respected her as a person. He realized that she had done more than just work for his family. She had helped raise his daughter with love. The next day, Richard talked to Emily again. He asked her how she felt about Grace. Emily's eyes shone bright. "Daddy, Grace is my best friend. She knows me better than anyone. When you travel, she makes sure I am never alone. She teaches me right from wrong. She is like family." Hearing this, Richard understood that his daughter's happiness was deeply connected to Grace's presence. He began to question his own beliefs about social status and family roles. How could he have thought that love and care had limits based on a person's job or background? One afternoon, Richard invited Grace and Emily to join him for a walk in the nearby park. As they walked under tall trees, Richard listened to their stories. Grace shared how she came to work for the family many years ago. She spoke about her hopes and dreams for Emily and her own life. Emily talked about her school, her friends, and her future plans. Richard felt closer to them than ever before. He saw them not as maid and child, but as two strong and loving people who had found each other in a big, sometimes lonely world. He realized that family is not only about blood, but also about love, trust, and care. That night, Richard lay in bed thinking about the changes inside him. He felt grateful for Grace's presence in Emily's life. He also felt proud of Emily for finding such a true friend. But most of all, he felt ready to change his own ways, to open his heart and mind to new ideas about family and love. In the days that followed, Richard made small changes in his behavior. He started talking more openly with Grace, asking about her thoughts and feelings. He also made time to play and laugh with Emily, knowing how important those moments were. One afternoon, Richard invited Grace to join the family dinner. It was the first time she sat at the main table, sharing the same food and stories. They talked about everyday things, work, school, and hopes for the future. The atmosphere was warm and full of respect. Richard noticed how Emily's face lit up when Grace was near. He understood that true happiness comes when people feel accepted and loved. He began to see Grace as part of the family, not just as a helper. As weeks passed, the house felt different. It was filled with laughter, trust, and closeness. Richard no longer felt uncomfortable about Emily's friendship with Grace. Instead, he felt grateful. He knew that his daughter had grown up with love from both him and Grace. One evening, Richard took Emily and Grace to the swimming pool again. They all sat by the water, talking and enjoying the cool breeze. Richard smiled as he watched Emily and Grace share stories and jokes. The pool had become a place of connection and joy. In his heart, Richard understood that life is about more than money and power. It is about the people who stand by us, who love us, and who help us become better. He was ready to live this truth every day. The days went by, and Richard's respect and love for Grace grew stronger. He promised himself to treat her as a family member and to support her in every way he could. He also promised to be a more present and loving father to Emily. This time at home was a new beginning for Richard. He had returned from a long journey, not just in distance but in his heart and mind. The surprise he found by the pool had opened his eyes to a deeper meaning of Feminia, meaning that would stay with him forever. As Richard spent more time at home, he began to see the strength of the bond between Emily and Grace more clearly. It was no longer just a surprise or curiosity, it was something real and deep. Richard started to understand that Grace was much more than a maid. She was a guardian, a teacher, and a friend to his daughter. This realization slowly changed the way he thought about family and love. One morning, Richard woke up early and went to the garden. The sun was shining softly, and the air was fresh. He saw Grace sitting on a bench, reading a book. Emily was nearby, drawing pictures with colored pencils. They looked peaceful and happy. Richard watched quietly for a moment before greeting them. "Good morning," he said warmly. Grace looked up and smiled. "Good morning, sir," Emily waved excitedly. "Daddy, come sit with us." Richard smiled and sat down next to them. For a few minutes, they all enjoyed the quiet morning. Then Richard asked Grace, "How did you come to work for our family, Grace? I want to know your story." Grace closed her book and looked thoughtful. "It was many years ago," she began. "I was looking for work to support my family. A friend told me about this house. At first I was nervous to work for such a big family. But your wife was kind, and Emily was just a baby then. I promised to take care of her like my own child." Richard listened carefully. He had never asked Grace about her life before. Now he felt grateful to learn more about the woman who had been so important to his family. Grace continued, "When your wife passed away, I stayed to support Emily and you. It was a hard time for all of us. I wanted to be there for Emily so she would not feel alone." Richard's eyes softened. He remembered those difficult days. Grace had been a quiet strength during that time. He realized how much she had sacrificed. To help his daughter grow up safe and loved, Emily looked up and smiled at Grace. "You have always been there for me, Grace. When Daddy was away, you helped me with my homework, cooked my favorite meals, and listened when I was sad. You taught me so much about kindness and strength." Richard felt a deep respect for both of them. He saw that Grace's love for Emily was true and pure. It was not about job or money. It was about heart. Over the next weeks, Richard made an effort to change old habits. He began to speak to Grace with more warmth and kindness. He asked for her advice on family matters, and even invited her to share meals with them. Grace in return showed humility and gratitude. One afternoon, Richard invited Grace and Emily to join him on a short trip to the countryside. He wanted to create new memories and strengthen their bond. They packed a picnic basket and drove to a quiet park near a lake. The sun was bright and the birds sang as they walked along the trail. Emily ran ahead, laughing. Grace followed, carrying the picnic basket. Richard walked beside her and talked gently. "I want to thank you, Grace, for all you have done," he said. "You have been more than a maid, you have been family." Grace looked surprised but pleased. "Thank you, sir. Your words mean a lot to me. I only wanted to help." They reached the lake and found a nice spot under a tree.
Ow.
Emily spread a blanket and laid out the food. They sat down together and shared sandwiches, fruit and juice. As they ate, Emily told stories about school and friends. Grace listened with interest and added little comments. Richard watched them and felt a warm feeling in his chest. This was the family he wanted. Later, Emily took Richard and Grace to the water's edge. She showed them how to skip stones on the lake. They laughed as the stones jumped across the surface. Richard felt happy to see his daughter so joyful. After the picnic, they walked back slowly. Richard took Grace's hand and said, "I am sorry if I ever made you feel less than part of this family. From now on, I want you to know you belong here." Grace smiled softly and squeezed his hand. "Thank you, sir. That means everything." Back home, Richard thought a lot about what family really means. He understood that love is not about blood or money, but about care, trust, and support. Grace had given Emily these things when Richard could not always be there. One evening, Richard sat with Emily and Grace by the fireplace. He shared stories from his childhood and listened to theirs. They talked about dreams, hopes, and the future. The room was filled with warmth and understanding. Emily looked at Richard and said, "Daddy, I want Grace to stay with us forever. She is my family." Richard smiled and nodded. "I want that too, Emily." Grace looked touched. "I will always be here for you both." From that day, Richard made Grace's position in the family official, invited her to family events, included her in important decisions, and made sure she felt respected. The house was no longer just a place of work. It was a home where love grew. Richard also spent more time with Emily, making up for the times he was away. He helped her with school projects, took her to the park, and listened to her stories. He wanted to be the father she deserved. As weeks turned into months, the three of them became closer. They shared joys and challenges together. Richard learned to let go of old ideas about class and status. He embraced the new family they had created. One day, Richard invited Grace and Emily to the pool again. This time he joined them in the water. They laughed and splashed, enjoying the simple pleasure of being together. Richard felt free and happy. He looked at Emily and Grace and thought about how life can surprise us. Sometimes the people we least expect become the most important. Sometimes love breaks barriers and builds bridges. Richard knew his journey was not over. There were still lessons to learn and changes to make, but he was ready to be a better father, a better man, and a better family. He smiled as he swam beside Emily and Grace, feeling grateful for the love that had found its way into his heart. As the days went by, Richard found himself thinking a lot about the walls he had built around his heart and mind. For many years, he had lived in a world where certain roles were clear. The maid was the maid, and the family was the family. Now, everything felt different. He had seen how Grace was not just a helper, but a person full of kindness, wisdom, and love. She had been there for Emily in ways he had never been able to. One afternoon, Richard sat in his study, staring out the window at the garden where Emily and Grace were tending to some flowers. He saw how they worked together, laughing and sharing stories. Richard felt a mix of pride and regret. Pride for the strong bond his daughter had found, and regret for the times he had not been present. He decided it was time to face the truth about himself. Richard knew that his feelings of discomfort had come from old ideas about race, class, and status that he had never questioned deeply. He realized these ideas had kept him from seeing the true value of people like Grace. That evening, Richard sat down with Emily and Grace in the living room. He wanted to be honest and open. "I have something to say," he began carefully. "For a long time, I held many thoughts that I did not fully understand. I thought that family and love had limits, but now I see that I was wrong. Grace, you have shown me what true care means. Grace looked at him with surprise and kindness. Thank you, sir. I only want what is best for Emily, Richard continued. I want to apologize if I ever made you feel less than family. From now on, I want to be better for Emily, for you, and for myself. Emily smiled brightly and took Richard's hand. Daddy, we are a family. There is no less than here. Richard felt a tear in his eye. It was the first time he had truly opened his heart. He knew this moment was a turning point. In the weeks that followed, Richard worked hard to change his habits. He invited Grace to share her thoughts and ideas about the house and Emily's education. He listened carefully and treated her with respect. Grace's confidence grew, and she felt more at home. One day, Richard arranged for Grace to take some classes in the nearby town. She had always wanted to learn more, but life's challenges had stopped her. Richard wanted to support her dreams now. Grace was grateful and excited. She promised to work hard and make the most of this chance. Emily was proud of Grace. She helped her with homework and encouraged her every day. Their friendship grew stronger, and Richard felt happiness knowing that both the important women in his life were growing and learning together. Richard also took time to reflect on his own life. He realized that his busy schedule had kept him away from Emily too often. He promised himself to be more present, to listen more, and to share his time. One Saturday, Richard planned a family day. He surprised Emily and Grace with tickets to a nearby theater. They spent the day laughing, enjoying the show, and eating ice cream. Richard saw how joyful his daughter was and felt a deep sense of fulfillment. At dinner that night, Richard spoke about his feelings. I've learned so much from both of you. Grace, you have been a teacher to me in ways I did not expect. Emily, you have shown me the meaning of love and friendship. Grace smiled gently. I am happy to be part of your family, Emily nodded. We are family forever. Richard knew that their home was now filled with love, respect, and acceptance. He felt proud of the changes they had made. One quiet evening, Richard and Grace spoke alone again. Thank you for trusting me, Richard said softly. I want to support you and help you reach your goals. Grace's eyes filled with tears. You have given me hope and strength. I will always be grateful. Richard realized that the journey they were on was not just about family. It was about growth, healing, and understanding. He felt ready to face the future with open arms. He thought about the day he first saw Emily and Grace in the pool. At that moment, he was shocked and unsure. But now, that image was a symbol of love breaking barriers. It was a reminder that true family comes from the heart, not from rules or titles. Richard looked at Emily and Grace and smiled. It had changed his life forever. Time passed gently in Richard's home. The days grew warmer, and the garden bloomed with colors of every kind. Richard, Emily, and Grace had grown closer than ever. What had once seemed strange and confusing had become the strongest part of their lives. The bond they shared was a true family bond built on trust, love, and respect. Richard often thought about how life surprises us. Sometimes the biggest lessons come from the smallest moments. That day he returned home and saw Emily, and Grace in the pool was one of those moments. It changed everything for him. It opened his eyes and heart in ways he never expected. Emily was happy too. She had two people who cared for her deeply. Richard, her father, was more present now. He spent time helping her with school, listening to her dreams and playing games. Grace was still by her side, guiding and loving her like a second mother. Emily felt lucky and loved. One afternoon, Richard decided to host a small gathering at home, invited close friends and family to celebrate the new chapter in their lives. The house was full of laughter, music, and delicious food. Could see the happiness that filled the room. During the party, Richard took a moment to speak. He stood up and looked at the faces around him. Thank you all for coming, he said. I want to share something important. Family is not just about blood or titles. It is about love, trust, and care. Grace has been a part of my family for many years, and I am proud to say she is one of us. The guests smiled and nodded. Some were surprised, but most understood the truth in Richard's words. Grace stood beside him, shy but proud. Emily held Grace's hand tightly. That night, after the guests left, Richard, Emily, and Grace sat by the fireplace. The room was warm, and the fire crackled softly. Richard looked at the two women who had changed his life. "I am grateful," he said. "You both have taught me what family really means." Emily smiled. "We are a family, Daddy. Always." Grace nodded. "And I will always be here for you." Richard felt a peace he had never known before. He knew that no matter what challenges came, they would face them together. As time went on, Richard continued to grow as a father and as a man. He supported Emily's dreams and made sure she felt loved every day. He helped Grace with her education and encouraged her to follow her own hopes. The house was no longer a place divided by roles or status. It was a home full of love, laughter, and shared dreams. Richard understood that true happiness comes from the people we care for and who care for us in return. One day, Richard took Emily and Grace to the swimming pool again. This time, he joined them in the water. They splashed, laughed, and played games. Richard felt free and joyful. He knew this moment was a symbol of their new family, strong, loving, and united. As the sun set, Richard looked at Emily and Grace. He saw hope in their eyes and love in their smiles. He knew that life's greatest gift was not money or power, but the family we choose and the love we give. Richard whispered softly, "Thank you for being my family." Emily and Grace smiled and hugged him tightly. Their story was one of surprise, growth, and love. It was a story that showed how hearts can change and how true family is made, not by blood alone, but by the bonds we build with care and kindness. And so, Richard, Emily, and Grace lived their days with joy, knowing that together they had found something precious and true, a family that would stand strong no matter what the future held. If you want, I can help expand or revise any part or assist with other stories too.